You're listening to the Sick and Good podcast. My name is Dustin Messick. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist and a cancer survivor.
My name is Colin Goodwin. I'm a clinical psychologist and a cancer survivor.
In 2024, we are highlighting the Cancer Awareness Months in a special series.
We're promoting wellness by having discussions on screening, treatment, and recovery throughout the cancer journey.
To find a balance between sick and good.
That during the cancer process, both can be true.
The Sick and Good podcast is for educational purposes only. The podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment and before undertaking a new healthcare regimen. Kailey Proctor is a board-certified specialist in oncology nutrition at City of Hope Orange Cancer Center. She has worked with cancer patients for 6 years and enjoys interacting with patients and their caregivers throughout their cancer journey, but focuses primarily on patients who are getting chemotherapy, radiation, or immunotherapy. Welcome to our podcast, Kailey.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
What sparked your interest in nutrition and specifically oncology nutrition?
I grew up in an Italian household. So my mother was always cooking. My nana was always cooking. So I learned to love food at a very early age. My mom was actually the one who suggested looking into nutrition as a major. But when I got to my internship, I knew I never wanted to work in a hospital. I like talking to people and building those relationships. And I had just finished my school nutrition rotation, which was really fun. You're interacting with kids all day. We were making veggie robots. And we had this dietitian mixer through the internship where we were meeting other Cal Poly graduates. And I told them I was going to the cancer center next for 2 weeks. And some of them just said it's a very intense rotation. So just be prepared. It can be very heavy. So I went in very nervous. I didn't know what to expect. I met my preceptor and she basically just said, "Did you do the homework?" I said, "Yes." And she's great. "We have a patient at 10. I'll brief you on it and then we'll go from there." And again, super nervous, brand new intern, don't know what I'm doing. And it was a really great experience. The first patient we had, she was a breast cancer survivor on tamoxifen, super friendly. And just throughout the 2 weeks, my preceptor at the time, Sarah, she let me really interact with the head and neck patients. We saw them at the cancer center or in the hospital. And I don't know, I just fell in love with it. I liked the nutrition aspect of it. The patients were super motivated. It was just a really great experience. And then from there, I just carried on that interest for cancer patients and oncology nutrition until I ended up with my first outpatient oncology job. So it's been a hit ever since.
Okay, can you tell us about the certification process to be a specialist in oncology nutrition?
Yeah, it doesn't involve too much more. If you're lucky to work outpatient oncology, you hit the hour requirement pretty early on. Right now, it's about 2,000 hours of direct patient care for cancer patients. And then you have to take an exam. The pass rate of the exam, I think right now is only 70%. So if anyone's interested in becoming board certified in oncology nutrition, definitely study. I'd give yourself a couple months just because the exam's pretty tricky. But you have to have those 2,000 documented hours, and then you can sit for the exam.
How's it feel to be board certified?
Oh, it's the best feeling walking out of that testing center. I was shaking because you get your score back right away. So I remember taking it, and within 10 questions, I'm like, I'm failing this. I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. This is a joke. And so you go through the questions and I'm just like, I failed. I absolutely bombed this. And everyone at work knows I'm taking it today. So
Yeah.
I'm sitting there shaking. I'm like, this is going to be so embarrassing when I go back on Friday. And I failed. And then I get the results back and they're like, "Oh, you passed." I was like, what? And so it was a great feeling. It was a really wonderful, fantastic feeling.
Victory.
But I know. It's just so nerve-wracking when you get it back right away because I feel like if they send the results to you a couple weeks later, you forget about it. You're not in that anxious state anymore, but it was all worth it in the end.
Switching gears a little bit here, what are some common treatment related effects taken into consideration for an oncology nutrition plan?
I think it's always important to remember every patient experiences treatment differently. So just because we say these are common side effects doesn't always mean that patients are going to experience these side effects. But across the board, I always take into consideration a patient's weight status going into treatment. And then I always go over what to do if your appetite starts to decline, just because we really emphasize patients maintaining their weight on treatment. I meet with a patient and they're already coming in with some weight loss, we definitely want to take that into consideration by focusing on high protein, high calorie foods to get them strong and keep them strong on treatment. Also, just getting a feel for how they're eating during the day. If I get a patient who's only eating 1 or 2 meals a day, I talk about just increasing the frequency to make sure we don't have any weight loss. And then, of course, just going into any GI related side effects like nausea, vomiting, bowel movements, just to get a good baseline and then go from there. Just because all of these side effects can affect, again, a patient's weight status and their energy and ultimately their quality of life while on treatment.
Could you tell us about maybe the common fears of going to a specialist in oncology nutrition?
Everyone thinks I'm the food police, and it's really funny because I am not. Everyone's, oh, don't judge me, or oh, yesterday was a really bad day. It's easier for me if you're honest with me so I can better help you. Typically, after patients meet with me, they're like, oh, I feel like I'm more strict on myself than you are. I was like, yeah, let's give yourself some grace right now. I also think just with the nature of me meeting with patients on treatment, and knowing that they need to eat to maintain their weight, if not gain a little bit of weight. My strategies for nutrition are a little bit different than if you were to meet with a dietitian whose focus is more on weight loss or weight management. But it's either that I'm going to make them eat salads 3 times a day, I'm going to take away all their favorite foods, I'm going to take away all the sugar in their diet, are a lot of common fears that I get. But overall, I'd say they think I'm the food police.
That they're going to get pulled over and asked, how fast do you think you were going? Which may actually apply there with the speed of which they're eating their meal.
Yeah, I'm just like, guys, I want to keep you healthy. I promise I'm not going to take away. I remember I had one patient, he was so afraid I was going to take away his avocados. He ate 2 avocados a day and he was so worried about it. I was like, no, that's actually doing you more good.
All right. What are some myth busters that you educate your patients on?
Okay, sugar feeding cancer is probably the biggest one. I hear it at least 2 or 3 times a day that sugar feeds cancer, it causes cancer, it's going to make their cancer worse or more aggressive, which as long as you're not eating sugar in excess and it's replacing opportunities for fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and protein, you're probably okay having a square or two of dark chocolate at the end of the night or a small bowl of ice cream. Overall, I would say sugar feeding cancer is the biggest one. Or lately, that patients need to be fasting going into their chemo, or that the keto diet's really great for them while they're on treatment, which everyone has different thoughts and feelings on how they should be eating. But again, if you're overly restrictive with what you're eating in terms of you're cutting out major food groups, especially protein, or you're only eating for 3 or 4 hours a day. Just again, I really try to educate patients that you're going to feel more tired, more weak, and lethargic. You might become dehydrated if you're not eating or drinking for prolonged periods of time. So, the good thing about being an outpatient, though, is you get to build those relationships. So, over time, if you meet with a patient who might not be as receptive in the beginning, hopefully after a couple sessions they're pretty open to what you're saying.
Okay. Is there any diets that you've been hearing about beyond like the ketogenic diet?
One that I think is interesting that has been around for a while too is the alkaline diet, that if you eat or drink all alkaline foods and you only drink alkaline water, that neutralizes the cancer so then it won't spread. And I had one patient, she's one of my first patients when I started in oncology. She spent, I think it was $15,000 on an alkaline filtration system in her home, and it put her into debt. Like the extremes that patients will go to, because cancer patients, they just want to do everything that they can. They don't want to go through this again. They don't want a recurrent. And I get it. And it's just criminal that some of these guidelines are presented to them. And if you do this, you won't get cancer or your cancer will not come back. That's one that I think breaks my heart the most is the alkaline one, just because patients will go to extremes with this. Not to mention, if you drink too much alkaline water, it weakens your gastric juices, which can really intensify maybe some treatment related side effects like nausea, bowel movements become sporadic. So it's not ideal. If you're drinking alkaline water because it tastes better, a common side effect of treatment is also taste changes. So some patients just can't taste, they just don't like the taste, I should say, of bottled water, tap water. So they like the alkaline water. And that's fine if it's for a taste reason. And I just say make sure you're not drinking it just because you think it's going to cure your cancer. I was just going to say, I think with cancer, a lot of it is so outside of their control. So, nutrition, what they're eating and what they're drinking, and how they're exercising, and what supplements they may or may not be taking, is just another measure for them to control that aspect. So, I get where some of this comes from too. It's just they want that control when they feel like a lot of these decisions and their treatment plan, it's just out of their control at this point. So, you do definitely see some patients start to develop more disordered eating or orthorexic tendencies just by nature of having that control back in their life.
And I know we talked about how you really don't want to be perceived as a food police, but I'm curious if there are things that maybe could be worded as an avoidance or just a limitation on when they're in active treatment.
Yeah, I do talk about food safety, and those tend to be my big, I don't want to say no-nos, but that tends to be the group where I'm just like, if you can, let's really reduce our intake of things like sushi or ceviche, rare cuts of meat, unpasteurized dairy, runny eggs, or if the egg yolk is not cooked all the way through, like soft boiled eggs and alfalfa sprouts. And patients always laugh because I'm picky about the alfalfa sprouts, just in the way they're packaged. There's so much moisture and you run the risk of bacteria growing. So I come at it from a food safety perspective of, I just don't want you to get sick while you're on treatment because your immune system might not be as strong. Those are my big with food, I guess you could say. Living in Southern California, a lot of patients get a little annoyed at me when I say no sushi, but I tell them it's just temporary. It's just while they're on treatment. It's not for forever. And I do say no alcohol, though, while on chemo, radiation, immunotherapy. The American Institute for Cancer Research says no alcohol under any circumstance for prevention, treatment, or survivorship. And not all patients love me at that point when I tell them that. But I think when you walk them through, just some of their chemo medications might be processed through the liver. And then if you're drinking, that just puts extra stress on the liver. So sometimes it's throwing in a little bit of science so they understand where these guidelines and recommendations are coming from.
What about the marijuana?
I always defer that to the oncologist. Some of them allow it, some of them are not fans. There are some studies that show it helps improve appetite, it can reduce nausea, and it may reduce anxiety. And sometimes patients who are really anxious, they're so anxious that they don't eat and then they're losing weight. There can be some benefits. My thing is, just make sure you are going to a certified dispensary. Do not go to your brother's, sister's, cousin's son who grows it in his backyard because you don't know what to be laced with. Let's make smart decisions. That's my one thing with that. I'm just like, just go to somewhere where it's like medically certified. It's not going to be laced with anything, but it can. Some patients do come back saying that when they started taking CBD products, they had less anxiety, they were sleeping better, so they were able to eat better.
But could you tell us about the A&D guidelines?
Yeah, right now, the A&D guidelines, they transitioned to the MyPlate method. So the USDA MyPlate, I think it came out, I want to say 2011. Don't exactly hold me to that year. It was under Michelle Obama, they revamped the pyramid. So now it's the MyPlate. Its intention was to span different cultures, very easy to implement in your day to day. It has the food group, so it has your protein, it has starches, fruits, vegetables, dairy. Some independent organizations criticized it for the meat and dairy industry having some buy in or some influence on the recommendations. So when I meet with patients who want to learn more about healthy eating or they want to talk about what to eat after they're done with their cancer treatment to reduce the risk of a recurrence or a secondary cancer, I go over the American Institute for Cancer Research's guidelines. They call it the New American Plate. So they took the USCMI plate, they looked at all the research and tailored it towards cancer patients. So the New American Plate method touches more on sugar, alcohol, and red meat, which I think are important and hot topics in the cancer community. Essentially, you get your dinner plate. Two-thirds of your plate should be plant based foods. So think more fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, lentils. I do put a little asterisk there though. Two-thirds of your plate should not be rice. It should be fruits and vegetables, more color, more texture. And then the remaining one-third of your plate should be a lean animal protein like chicken or turkey breasts, eggs, white fish, salmon, low fat, reduced fat, dairy, just to make sure you're still getting the essential and non essential amino acids that cancer patients need to recover some of their muscle mass that they might have lost after treatment, or if they're still having fatigue that can persist for months after treatment as well. So I tend to use that recommendation more than the My Plate method just because it's tailored more towards cancer patients.
The AR recommendations of the New American Plate, to me, like my mind goes to that sounds like something that you'd order at Texas Roadhouse. The New American Plate would have every meat, all protein, all the time, and I know that was something that had been perhaps controversial with the pressure that the beef industry and other food producers had on then creating My Plate, and it makes sense that have that the New American Plate be something of more of that recommendation. I was curious to see if you could just maybe just speak to your own institution's offerings. What is the food like at the City of Hope?
Oh my goodness. Colin and Dustin, let me tell you. So I had to train up at the time we called it main campus. So right now I work at City of Hope Orange County. That's the main campus in Orange County. And then we have City of Hope in Duarte. That's the flagship or mothership is what I call it. But I had to train up there for about probably a month and a half. And I was commuting easily an hour and a half to 2.5 hours each way. And I had to do this for a month and a half, like I said. And the drive was miserable. But let me tell you, I always looked forward to lunch because the food was phenomenal. Like they had this salmon teriyaki with rice and broccoli. But what's really cool when you're a dietitian is you learn about where they're sourcing their foods and how they plan their menus. And so City of Hope does really pride itself on trying to provide organic when possible. They had a lot of organic, wild caught, grass fed beef. They really take pride in their nutrition and seeing food as medicine. That's not to say it was completely void of any processed food or anything like that, but they do really pride themselves on sourcing ingredients, making the food as nutritious as possible with the least amount of ingredients. The clinical nutrition manager is always looking for new recipes to work with the chefs and how we can get it to cancer patients. Oh, they're phenomenal. I love the food there. I can't speak more highly of it. If you get a chance to ever eat at City of Hope, which I hope you don't, but at the same time, if you do, I don't think you'll be disappointed. And patients always told me it was some of the best hospital food they've ever had.
Certainly brings me back to the quote. I guess it's a Hippocratic oath, not oath, but quote. Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food.
Definitely. And I think City of Hope really puts an emphasis on that, which is really cool. And even right now, City of Hope Orange County, at the time of recording this, our hospital is still being built. So right now it's just the outpatient facility. So we have a small cafe, but it's been really exciting because I was the first dietitian hired. So I've been working with our chef right now to come up with ways to either make smoothies and bring them up to the infusion center for patients to try that are high in protein, high in calories. He's always looking at ways to improve recipes, sourcing different ingredients that will benefit patients. So it's been really exciting that we're building this little cafe, and I can't even imagine how good the food is going to be when we open up the main hospital next year. So it's an exciting time, but yes, across the board, City of Hope food is fantastic, and I'm a little bit of a picky eater, so it has my seal of approval.
Yeah, I gotta say, in all of my treatment, because I went to a lot of hospitals, City of Hope, I remember being blown away. I looked at the menu and I was like, there's a root beer float. Oh my.
Exactly. And again, City of Hope, we cater mainly towards cancer patients. And that's always something to remember is yes, they still had a heart healthy diet, like that was low sodium, low fat, but at the end of the day, it's still geared towards cancer patients. So we're trying to maximize flavor if you're not having any, or if you're experiencing any taste changes, like you don't have any taste after your chemo. We want to give you the calories and the protein that you need to maintain your weight and maintain your strength. So it is a little different that way. But when patients, I had a handful, they told me they didn't like the food. I was like, have you been to other hospitals? Because I have. And let me tell you, the food here is phenomenal. So I can't rave about it more. I love their emphasis on quality ingredients. It made the 3-hour commuting day just worth it for that meal. Oh, loved it.
Maybe after this podcast, some of our listeners will just go to City of Hope as their place for eating.
It's so good. It's phenomenal. I looked forward to seeing what the specials were every day. The soups were great. Oh, I loved it. I ate very well that month and a half, I have to say.
And also another note is a lot of times it's temperature is the reason why patients don't like the food is they wake up from their nap and they're like, "Oh, food's here." And they're like, "Oh, it's cold. This food is bad tasting."
Oh, yeah. There's always, in a hospital, it's never going to be perfect, right? You're never going to get it truly fresh when it's cooked. You might have to wait because you're napping. You've got scans that you have to wait for. So that's important to always recognize as maybe if you're complaining, it could just be it wasn't heated up properly or it was too hot. But I feel based on my experience, patients were pleasantly surprised with the food.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised and this was like almost 15 years ago. And I'm glad to hear that nothing has changed. If anything, it sounds like it might be even better. You were driving 3 hours. I don't know if I would have driven 2 hours, but I don't know if I would have driven 3 hours for the food.
I had to train. That's the only way I could keep my job that I loved. It was worth it though. I
You
was
made
always
it sound like it was all about the food. You're like, I don't know if I really care about this job, but the food, oh my.
at the end of the day, I'm a foodie. I love food. I love the cooking process, the tasting process, coming up with different flavors. It's what got me into nutrition. That's from my nana and my mother. But yeah, sometimes food is the highlight of the day. But it was just a nice when you look into that, the specials were just phenomenal. So good.
So to switch gears again, I do love talking about food. Then this what I am going to ask about food. There was a recent study on ultra processed foods linked to development of cancer. Can you speak to that?
Yes. There are this study in particular, and there have been other studies that are showing that an increased consumption in ultra processed foods may increase the risk of cancer. Specifically, colon cancer has been a pretty prevalent finding. I think some studies are saying they've noticed an increase in diagnosis before the age of 50. Some have said before the age of 40. I will say it's been interesting since this study came out and looking back and just seeing my patients. The colorectal patients are getting a little bit on the younger side. I have a handful that are in their mid to early 40s. And I think this study just highlights too ultra processed foods and food deserts, right? Because if you don't have access to fresh foods like fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, and you just have to shop at either convenience stores or you only have one grocery store that's miles away, you have to rely on foods that are shelf stable, that typically are these ultra processed foods that have a lot of preservatives, ingredients to keep them shelf stable and they last a while. God bless my patients. I love them dearly. Some of them are so blatantly honest with me in terms of what they eat, right? And you do just notice that, yeah, diet could influence this, a lack of fiber, a lack of vitamins and minerals, and increasing your intake of processed foods that's replacing opportunities for more fresh foods is definitely something concerning, I think, in the American food supply.
Yeah, and I actually also heard a recent, I think it was like in the last year, they found that just looking at population, that a lot of children are eating somewhere between 60 to 80% of their diet is ultra processed foods. I think it's more closer to 60, but that seems like a lot of the ultra processed foods are like usually grains, a lot of grain foods. And earlier you were talking about trying to incorporate all the different food groups, right? Like grains, vegetables, fruits, protein, dairy. Wild card is what I like to throw in there as a when you don't know what food group something goes in, like cupcake could be like dairy
Oh,
or
that's
grains.
cute. I like that.
Yeah, wild card because it's a little easier to conceptualize. Sometimes people throw avocado in wild card because they don't know where
Mm,
it goes. Is it a fruit or a vegetable? I was thinking about how it's probably like somebody who is undergoing cancer treatment might have a hard time eating higher fiber foods and maybe ultra processed foods, which are highly palatable. Maybe
exactly.
that might be a go to for them.
And I think that's where you have to take every patient individually, right? I have some patients who are a little food insecure. So you just have to make the best choices where you can. I have other patients who are severely malnourished, and the thought of eating a vegetable revolts them. And, or the other thing is, yes, of course, I'm always going to encourage fruits, vegetables, and whole grains and beans and lentils, more of that plant forward diet, right? I feel like they would take away my credentials if I didn't. However, if you have a patient who has a BMI of 17, no appetite, can only eat a fourth of a slice of toast with a little bit of butter on it before she feels full, you just have to meet the patient where she's at. And I don't want her filling up on all these high fiber foods because then she might feel so full to the point where she doesn't want to eat anything later. And oftentimes, these high fiber foods don't have too much calorically or protein wise. So it is about meeting patients where they're at. It's always important to remember patients who are on chemo, on radiation, this is a unique time in their life, so their nutrition needs might be a little bit different. So if you find that you're eating just bagel and cream cheese or bagels and peanut butter, and this is just not something you normally eat, but it's all you can get down, honestly, I'd rather them eat that than nothing at all because we know the weight loss can increase the risk of breaks, delays, and toxicities from treatment. So I can't emphasize that enough. I think when you're a dietitian and you work in the oncology world, you just have to meet patients where they're at and remember that every day is going to be a little bit different for them. Every cycle of treatment is going to affect them a little bit different. So you just have to meet patients where they're at and really listen to them. But when you can and when you're feeling good, I do really emphasize more unprocessed foods, fruits, vegetables where we can. But if it's just not in the cards that day, it's not in the cards that day.
I feel a lot more relieved because earlier you were like small bowl of ice cream. And I was like, I don't think I have ever had a small bowl of ice cream in my life. It was like mountains of ice cream.
It's
And
funny. Yeah, because patients will be like, going back to the sugar reference, and I always say this, I'm like, I know this is going to be the most annoying thing coming from a dietitian, but moderation when it comes to sugar. And they just look at me with this glazed over look. Did you really just say that? Like, I did. I have to.
moderation sure makes sense. You need the variety for your palate. Like honey, what's the other one? Is guava one? Like they're making like guava syrup stuff and raw sugar versus stevia. There's so many different kinds out there.
There are a lot. And it's sometimes overwhelming to keep up with, even as a dietitian, but moderation, it's what we preach.
I guess I had a question to further that conversation, but also wanted to maybe just a two-parter here. I wanted to hear what the difference between processed foods and ultra processed foods was, and really just get your thoughts on artificial sweeteners, if you could share
Yeah.
that.
With the ultra processed foods versus processed foods, from my understanding, and again, I could be wrong, I don't claim to know everything. There's no formal definition. This is an ultra processed food. My understanding is a processed food could be something like canned tuna, right? It's still processed because that is not how tuna is naturally in a can, but typically minimal additives or preservatives versus something, an ultra processed food is something your grandmother would not cook. So think of like a bag of Doritos. You can't really make those homemade. I know there are recipes on Pinterest, so don't come at me for that. But typically, you're not going to get the same thing. So something with a very prolonged shelf life, in my definition, is an ultra processed food versus a processed food. Again, maybe canned tuna, canned salmon. My favorite bars are those Lara bars with the dates and the dried fruit. That could be considered a processed food because again you have to process it to get it like that, but the ingredients are still minimal. You can still read them, you know what they are, you can find them in your kitchen. And then let's talk about artificial sweeteners because I do get this question a lot. My stance has always been it's not the poison, it's the dose. So if you only put one, maybe two packets or 1 to 2 teaspoons in your coffee in the morning just because you like the taste of it and it's a little bit sweeter when you use the artificial sweeteners versus the sugar. So actually, you need less of it than the sugar. I don't have an issue with that because I'd rather you focus on the big picture of your diet. And I see this a lot. People worry about the really minuscule parts of their diet, whereas I feel like we should just go back to the basics. Are you eating enough fruits and vegetables? Are you getting 5 a day? Are most of your grains whole grains? When you have protein, is it a lean source of protein versus ones that are more processed or higher fat? Versus, again, the 1 to 2 teaspoons of artificial sweeteners in your coffee in the morning.
So it's all right to have sugar in your coffee, is what I'm hearing.
I've said this before, and then I ask, how many cups of coffee do you drink a day? And they're like, oh, 4 to 5. I'm like, okay, see, that's where you just need to figure out. If you're only having 1 or 2, fine. Anything more than that, I think we should just cut back a little.
Okay. I did want to add, while you're answering your question, I did want to look up like the official definition of ultra processed foods to respond to Colin's question. And yeah, it's basically what you said about tuna or even like canned beans. So like
Mhm.
processed foods are made by adding groups two foods to group one food, usually to increase their durability or enhance their sensory qualities. Examples: canned vegetables, fruit preserved in syrup, and canned fish preserved in oil, where ultra processed foods are formulations of ingredients typically created by various industrial techniques and processes. Examples are soft drinks, packaged snacks, cookies, pastries, cakes, sweetened cereal, cheese, frozen pizza, chicken, fish nuggets, sticks, and reconstituted meat products. I could always put this link in the description of the episode if people want to read more about the processed foods criteria, if necessary. But I just wanted to add that little bit. What do you think about that, Kaylee?
I think that's a great definition because at the end of the day, what beans are, right? Like it might be in a can, but it's still pretty close to nature. Fish, pack it in oil, that's great. You're going to absorb some more vitamins and minerals that are fat soluble, but it's still just fish at the end of the day versus the Twinkies or the chips or just the sugar sweetened cereals, things like that. Ultra processed foods, they do need to be limited because they're often void of fiber, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. And I don't want to say they're addictive, but if they're sweetened with sugar, you need to eat more of it over time to get that same hit. And that's again where that whole it's easy to gain weight if you're over consuming ultra processed foods. And we know that being overweight or obese increases the risk of 12 to 13 different types of cancer. So you just have to be careful with that. But I also recognize that if you're food insecure or you live in a food desert, because in Southern California, we're pretty blessed to have a grocery store. It seems like almost on every corner or every shopping plaza, we've got farmers markets, but that's not the way the rest of the country is. So it's also important, again, to recognize that some patients are food insecure or they live in food deserts. So it's harder for them to have access to these either just processed foods or wholesome foods.
Yeah, the food deserts is a real problem. I also was going to say, from hearing what you said about ultra processed foods and just getting more like balanced meals in, it almost sounds like the absence of the fiber, the nutrient dense foods is more of the concern than actually the consumption of the ultra processed foods itself.
The more we learn about fiber, fiber is a dietitian's favorite F word. We love fiber in the nutrition community. It's amazing. It is just this nutrition superstar that the more we learn about it, the more we're just like, wow, this is incredible. But in terms of cancer, one, fiber acts like a balloon in your stomach. So the minute it hits your stomach, it expands. It's going to keep you fuller longer. So you're less likely to snack, which helps you, again, maintain a healthy weight. So that's one thing. Two, the other thing is fiber, I call it, it just cleans up your digestive tract, meaning it turns over the new cells. So it might reduce the risk of gastric or colorectal cancer. There are some studies that have shown fiber can pick up extra estrogen, takes it to the liver to be broken down so it can reduce the risk of hormone sensitive cancers. It is truly this nutrition rock star. And most of these ultra processed foods are just devoid of fiber. And it's still unclear if, because for a while those Fiber One products were just the latest and greatest thing, right? Like you could have a granola bar with 14 grams of fiber. That's basically half the fiber you need for the day, right? And this really tasty granola bar. But we're still unsure if the added fiber acts like naturally occurring fiber, because oftentimes I hear patients who have these fiber products tend to have a lot of GI issues, a lot of painful gas, bloating, constipation, or diarrhea. So it's still unclear if that added fiber has the same health benefits as the natural fiber. So again, this is where I'm like, foods first. If it's found in nature, let's do it that way versus taking either a supplement or a food with a strong additive to it.
So interesting. It's like they're taking the fiber out of its natural habitat and it's just like a fish out of water.
That is a great analogy. I actually love that because it's true. And I think it's also important when we read these studies about fiber or any vitamins or minerals. We eat food. We don't eat, like, you don't go to the grocery store and you don't look and you're like, I'm going to go to aisle or in the produce section, I'm going to go and get vitamin C. No, you get an orange. You don't go, oh, I need potassium. No, you get a banana. So it's important that we recognize this in the sense that we don't know how different vitamins and minerals interact with each other. So we can't isolate some of this stuff. So going back to the fiber, we can't take it out of its natural habitat, put it in something it doesn't belong, and expect it to do the same thing.
There was this study that I always refer to with my patients where it was like, and I think Kaylee's going to get this right away. Maybe Colin might know. So it was like they had their test subjects drink apple juice. It was like apple juice with plastic like bits in it, and it was a dried apple, and then it was, of course, like the apple.
Uh huh.
So like apple's obviously going to win, but second to the apple, what do we think won?
Is Colin answering this or am I?
I don't know. Colin, you want to answer? We can test your knowledge.
I was not prepared for a quiz.
All right, let's just have Kaylee respond to this then.
It was the one with the dried apple, wasn't it?
Yeah, the dried apple, all that fiber,
Yeah.
and then polyphenols is like a
Mhm.
conversation as well. Yeah, definitely was like, even for me as a dietitian, like when I heard about the study, it was mind blowing to me because so many people are like, "Oh, it's all about the juice."
No, and that's the other thing I tell patients too, because juicing's a big thing. At least here in Southern California, I don't know about different parts of the country. Everyone always comes to me and they're like, I juice. And I'm just like, but you're missing the fiber, like that pulp. That's where all the good stuff is. Because, and I talk about this in my monthly nutrition class, 1 cup of orange juice, you down that in what, 2 to 3 minutes? Maybe you space it out over 10 minutes, but there's no fiber there. So you can drink this, not feel any different in terms of hunger levels versus if you were to eat 3 oranges, which is the equivalent of 1 cup of orange juice, you're going to feel pretty full because of all that fiber. So again, I love fiber. I wish people ate more of it.
Yeah, what's your stance on blending versus juicing?
So with juicing, unless you are using the pulp in some other way, I just don't understand why you're doing it. Again, you got to take every patient into consideration. If a patient truly has no appetite and they just want to drink their calories, sure, let's juice because that's still going to get something in you, right? From a health perspective, blending probably is better because you still have the whole fruit intact. You might not be getting as much of the fiber because you're blending it so you're breaking down the cell wall where all the fiber is, but it's still in there, right? Like you're not removing any parts of the fruit. So if you're putting like an apple in a blender, just keep the peel on it because that's where all the fiber is. But I'd rather you blend, make smoothies versus juice and then not use the pulp. And then you're literally throwing away all of the good stuff.
This is a great segue to my next question, which is, should cancer patients on treatment be supplementing on dietary supplements or nutrition shakes?
I love this question. I am more on the conservative side, and I say no supplements on chemo radiation for a variety of reasons, unless medically indicated by your doctor. So I have some patients who are on a chemo that can be really hard on their bones, so they're taking a calcium and vitamin D. Other patients, they're vegetarians or pescatarians, they might not be getting as much B12 that they need. So they're taking a B12 supplement. That's different. I do strongly discourage mega doses of antioxidants while on chemo and radiation. And so when I say antioxidants, the ones I always scan for in the charts and educate patients on are vitamin C, beta carotene, zinc, turmeric, selenium, CoQ10. And the reason why is antioxidants, yes, they are fantastic for you because they act like a bubble around all of our cells to prevent free radical damage. So it's this nice little safety bubble. However, they don't differentiate between your cancer cells and your healthy cells. So they're making this nice bubble around all of your cells. But when you're getting chemo or radiation, think of a radiation beam, right? It's coming full force, hopefully towards those cancer cells. Yes, healthy cells get damaged in the process, but we're just going to say they're coming towards the cancer cells. The radiation beam is going to hit that protective barrier first, full impact. So by the time it actually gets to your cancer cells to do the magic, it's a little bit weakened. It's not as strong. So that's one reason why we don't want you supplementing with high doses of antioxidants. The other one is some studies have shown taking mega doses of vitamin E has been shown to increase the risk of prostate cancer. And it can just be more harmful for patients on treatment to be supplementing, especially if they're not third party tested. So you always want to look if you're supplementing with anything for an NSF or USP labeling to make sure that what you are taking is actually what you're getting versus fillers. In terms of the nutrition shakes, I don't push them either way, but I can't lie and say for cancer patients, they often have a time and a place. If you are jam packed throughout the day with appointments and you don't have time to have a meal, yes, it's going to be very convenient to get calories and protein through an Ensure Max or a Premier Protein. I have some patients, head and neck patients, by weeks 3 or 4, solid foods are really hard to take. So, yeah, they're going to need nutrition drinks to give them the strength to get through their treatment. Other times, you just need to find ways to add protein to a smoothie. So, some patients like using them as a backbone, and that also gets them an opportunity to increase their fruit intake in smoothies. So, nutrition shakes, time and a place. I don't push them either way. Some patients don't want to take them. That's fine. Others do rely heavily on them. You just, again, there's that spectrum there of when and where patients need it. But the supplements, I am a little bit picky on.
It sounds like the argument that you're making is to focus on more of the macro nutrient versus the micronutrient. That's the, if I could just sum it up, I'm not sure if that's the best way to put it, but
that's perfect. One patient, she called me, she's this cute little 87 woman. And English was not her first language, but she always called me the protein queen. So I think when you're looking at cancer patients who are on treatment, the biggest thing I always emphasize is protein rich foods every time you sit down to eat, eating enough to maintain your weight, no crazy restrictive diets. At the micro level, yes, I do still want you to get those fruits and vegetables and the vitamins and minerals you need where you can, but I realize that's not always feasible given the side effects from treatment.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I was thinking about, I was really curious about in our discussion is, do you recommend that cancer patients that are undergoing treatment who might be in a bigger body lose weight? Is that ever something that is important during treatment?
Yeah, and this is actually a little bit of a controversial area, right? Because if you get someone with a BMI who is obese or morbidly obese, you know that maintaining a healthy weight is going to improve their outcomes in the long run, right? But you also know that depending on their treatment, like the chemo is often based on their weight. And then so if they lose too much weight, then they have to get a dose reduction, or radiation. If you lose too much, it messes with the fields of radiation. So you might have to go through the mapping process again. There's a lot of things to measure out. So what I tend to look for is if I have this patient who is losing a healthy amount of weight because their BMI is over 30 or over 40, and it's not related to their cancer treatment. So they're not losing weight because they're having extreme nausea and vomiting, or they have no appetite at all and no energy. If it's someone who comes to me and they're only losing half a pound to maybe a pound a week, and they've just increased the quality of their food, so they're eating more minimally processed foods, I don't get as concerned. But if it does get to the point where they're losing a lot of weight, even through improved diet quality, I'm like, okay, maybe we should pause this a little bit. Let's focus on heart healthy fats like olive oil, avocados, nuts, trail mix, seeds to give you a little bit more calories and protein just so we don't compromise your being while on treatment. Because even if you lose weight in a healthy way, I still got to imagine the fatigue can hit you just because you're not getting what your body needs. So it's a little bit of a gray area. This comes up in the message boards a lot for the oncology nutrition practice group of we have this patient who her BMI is over 30. Is weight loss okay? Is it not okay? I tend to say if you can improve your diet quality, but let's try to hang out where you're at just while you're on treatment. And then we can always talk about weight loss and weight management after.
Makes sense. The concern with treatment is that if they lose too much weight, like you said, the fatigue, and also just maintaining weight is going to be hard. They're going to have a lower appetite and all the medications.
Exactly. I think you tend to hear this more about patients who are just starting treatment or haven't started yet about what if I lose weight in a healthy way? But I think the reality sometimes sets in by cycles 2 or 3 of, oh, it's just a little bit different. And I haven't gone through cancer treatment. So just based on what my patients have told me, the fatigue hits you a little bit different than, oh, I just didn't sleep well the night before the past couple of days. It's just like this overwhelming fatigue that's pretty hard to shake. And it makes sense if you're not eating enough and you're not going to feel great because your body's not getting the energy it needs.
So what I'm hearing from this conversation is controversial when it comes to losing weight when you're in active treatment.
Yeah. And I know the oncologists at City of Hope, the ones I work with, tend not to promote rigorous weight loss while on treatment, regardless of BMI, but they do encourage healthy eating habits.
Makes sense.
And I do have some patients that they go through chemo or they go through radiation and they do improve their diet quality. And then that carries on after they're done with treatment. So then they make these sustainable long-term treatments that benefit them in the long run. So that can happen as well because a cancer diagnosis scares a lot of patients and they want to improve their diet. And this is one way that really keeps them on track for that. But I tend not to promote too much weight loss on treatment, regardless of weight.
Kailey, I wanted to thank you for joining us on the podcast and for being the protein queen rather than the food police. So just wanted to thank you for your expertise and your time.
Thank you guys so much. It was an absolute pleasure.
Our podcast will discuss topics related to cancer treatment and the recovery process, including diagnosis, family support, resources, medications, and nutrition. We aspire to have conversations pertinent and relevant to the cancer journey. Thank you for listening to the Sick and Good podcast. We'd like to invite you to connect with us on our social media at Instagram and Facebook accounts. We're also happy to share that we have launched the Sick and Good podcast website, sickandgood.com. This website is a place to read our bios, subscribe to the podcast, listen to full episodes, or read full transcripts, and contact us with your questions or comments. We care about your listener experience and would love to hear from you to keep the conversation going on the topics of cancer and wellness.